I'm here with Stephen Hager of newidentity.com, and that's spelled with an N-E-U, N-E-U identity.com.
Yes.
And Stephen, you've been in neuroscience for a long time, and I recently heard you use the term brain strengths. And so I'm curious, what does brain strengths mean? What's that all about, and why should it matter to an entrepreneur?
That's a great question, and thank you so much for asking that. I think in an earlier video, Steve, we talked about neurodiversity, and that's our uniqueness.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It's how we're programmed for success, and everyone is very unique. Well, the tip of the neurodiversity iceberg is how we prefer to learn, think, communicate, solve problems, make decisions, work productively.
Okay.
So the heart of that, which is really our foundational system for life, is what we call our sensory and our cognitive pathways.
Okay.
So we take in information. Here's the short course on it. We take in information through our senses. You're familiar with the 5 senses.
Sure.
The 3 that we're going to talk about and take a look at is visual,
okay, visual,
kinesthetic, and auditory.
Auditory.
Okay. We also take
I think I've heard you talk about those.
Yeah. Right. So we also take in information with our smell and taste.
Mm-hmm.
So visual is kind of like picture smart. It's the ways in which you're smart. Some people tend to focus more on visual than kinesthetic or auditory. So they're gonna remember what they see. They're very good in graphics and design, reading and seeing things out of place, quality control, observations, reading people's body language and their faces. And they also tend to have the characteristics of always being very color coordinated with their with their clothes. Okay. Now the second one, I believe I said, was kinesthetic. The kinesthetic are people who are very hands-on. They like direct experience. They learn by moving and driving and working with tools and equipment and their hands. And
they're the ones that say, I'm not going to get it unless I can get my hands on it.
They got to get their hands on
it.
it. And so, some people who are very kinesthetic don't necessarily like to build things and repair things, but they like to touch things, and they like to have always the sensation of movement. And they typically get a lot done when they are working with their computer. They do a lot of good thinking when they're driving the car or their bicycle or running and things like that.
So kinesthetic doesn't necessarily mean manual labor.
It does not. It does not.
It has to do with touch and motion in different ways.
And the third is auditory.
Okay.
And that's the rarest. But yet, how do we communicate mostly, Steve?
A lot of it's just verbal.
Auditory for in meetings.
Right.
And I'll give you the percentages as how it breaks down in a moment. So we'll go through the sensory, and then we'll pick up more on the cognitive component. Okay. So auditory people, they're really good at listening. They're attentive listeners. They ask questions. They're storytellers. They're good with crafting words. And they remember what they've heard. And also, they remember people's tone of voice. Now, everyone has a preferred sequence.
Okay.
You have a primary. That's what you pay most attention to. You have your secondary, which is your backup, because in order to take in information, you need to hit on at least 2 cylinders. And then you have the one you pay least attention to. And what you pay least attention to is usually called your blind spot.
Okay.
Why? Because if you're taking in information on the other 2, and you say, good, I've got enough, you start to ignore and not pay as much attention to the last one, and your blind spot. So you're likely to make a mistake. So if auditory is your blind spot, you're not likely to hear things properly, get instructions correct, or pick up a tone of voice. If visual is your blind spot, you're not likely to see things.
Right,
being able to find things, see something wrong with a picture or a data array,
so you can have
a legal document.
Yeah, here's an example. You have 2 people. that maybe they're walking down the street, they're driving or whatever, and one person is constantly noticing this, that, and the other. Oh, did you see that? Did you notice that? No, I didn't see anything.
Exactly.
That's part of that, I think, is what you're talking about.
And kinesthetic people who have kinesthetic as a blind spot are likely to be a little clumsy and awkward and make physical mistakes and stumble. So it has a lot of risk management aspect to it. Now, we talked about flip sides in one of the other interviews. So the flip side of each blind spot means a creative mode.
Okay.
And what that means is, doesn't it make sense that if you start paying situationally attention to that which you don't, you're going to pick up a little more?
Sure. So if you're aware that you have a blind spot, then
exactly, then
you're able to kind of shore that up a little bit. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone has a sequence. I mentioned earlier the percentages. Over 60% of the world's population, and we've been collecting data now since 1992 worldwide. Most of the world is primarily kinesthetic, then visual, and only 11% of the world's population that we have in our databases has auditory as a primary means of communicating.
Interesting.
Yeah. And think about long meetings, think about misunderstandings, that I think that makes sense.
Yes.
And think about why touchscreen technology is so important, because it has a visual and kinesthetic component to it.
Oh boy, that's true.
So most people don't know their sensory sequence and the implications of it. When you do know it, you can leverage it, because you asked the question earlier, why is that important? Well, doesn't it make sense that when you work with your strengths rather than against them, you're gonna have greater success with life?
Yes, and so when we talk about entrepreneurs, not only their own brain strengths, but understanding conceptually how all that works, building a management team, and then building your staff, having that understanding of brain strengths would be an important component of your success.
Absolutely. This applies to everyone, whether you're employed or not, entrepreneur or whatever field that you're in. It's important to know what your strengths are and leverage them, and to know what your blind spot is so that you can be situationally strong. Because when you know where you are blind, if you give it attention, you're no longer blind. If you know where to look and where to focus on, now you're paying attention to it, now you're situationally strong.
Right.
So I think you can see the significance of that.
Yes.
Yeah, well, the cognitive part.
We don't want to miss anything.
We're taking in information. So what separates humans from the animal kingdom is we have this neocortex up here, which processes information and thinks. So we have two components. We have our sequential processing, which has to do with logic and order and detail and processes, mathematical calculations, realism and practicality. That's our sequential. And then we have our other side, which is global. It's big picture, possibilities, options. So the truth is that no one is 100% sequential or 100% global. Both sides of the brain are connected to one another through this band of nerves up here called the corpus callosum. But everyone seems to have a strong tendency to be either sequential or global. So doesn't it make sense, too, that it's important to know that so that you can leverage your strengths, your thinking strengths. So, for instance, would a highly global person make a great accountant?
I don't think so.
No, right.
And vice versa.
Exactly. Or would a highly sequential person make a great architect, conceptual architect?
Yeah, I can see exactly where you're going with that.
It doesn't mean you can't succeed in that, but your strengths aren't exactly aligned. So to answer your last question, and to keep within the time that we had agreed on for this interview, you can accurately determine your sensory and cognitive brain strengths in about 15 minutes with a statistically validated assessment on that newidentity.com website, spelled NEU.
Okay.
So
thank you for joining us,
Stephen. More about it.